Hello, little men. Gnomes are the resident little guys of D&D. They are known for their curiosity, their whimsy, and for being the least popular cold race in all of D&D by like a wide margin. Why? Well, I'm Antonio D'Amico, this is Pointy, and that's what we're here to find out and offer a fix for in this brand new episode of D&D with a twist, Gnome Edition. So when I think of gnomes, I think of... Gnome is the race for vertically challenged mathletes and Lego children, and not much else. These guys do not see much play. Gnomes are often typecast as wizards, and when they let the Eberron books out to play with the other books, artificers. They are here to embody a hardly defined and nebulous fantasy of tiny small man who is also very smart and, more importantly, kooky. And if you feel like this is too specific, you are right. So what does the lore tell us about these short kings? Let's take a look. So gnome lore has fluctuated a lot throughout editions. Also, water is wet and the sun will most likely come out tomorrow. In 4e, gnomes were very firmly planted in the Feywild adjacent camp, along with elves and... whatever this is. In 3.5e, they were more dwarf adjacent, sort of a convergent evolution kind of situation happening. Their origin myth has it so that they were born of gemstones, with each gnome subrace originating from a different gemstone, so it does feel dwarf-esque. 5e leans towards the dwarf kind of thing, but not really, but kinda, but maybe. Are you surprised? Me too. I always thought we all agreed that these guys were of the leprechaun-scented variety, but nope, no Fey. The reason for this is that gnomes just feel very Fey-coded, even in 5e. Whenever a poor soul that seeks to start D&D comes to me for guidance, the fool, and ask the curse question, what is gnome? I often say that gnomes are to halflings what elves are to humans. Halfling is sort of the mundane baseline to the gnomes' magic-y weirdo vibes. Lore-wise, and you better listen up because this will show up later, don't make me tap the sign, gnomes are all about being unseen. Much like halflings, and expect me to say much like halflings throughout this entire video, these guys have a branding problem. Gnomes have survived by generally being out of everyone else's way. They live in a world that is filled with creatures bigger and stronger than them, and they have managed to survive in this world by using the ancient technique called the birthday boy argument.
Happy birthday.
Gnomes are just a little guy, a guy with glasses, and it's their birthday. You wouldn't hit a little gnome boy with glasses on their birthday. This, coupled with their penchant for illusion magic, have made their culture all about just not standing out that much and hoping people just kind of forget they are there, which apparently has worked really well when people are picking a race to make their characters, other than standing against the wall at prom and hoping people won't notice that they didn't bring a date. Gnomes' second defining trait is their curiosity. Gnomes are extremely curious, to a point there's even writing stipulating that boredom is extremely negative to their health. This is, once again, very interesting. Let's tap the sign one more time. Gnomes will generally chase anything they find intellectually stimulating, which is what makes them good wizards, because you really gotta find the arcade interesting to spend half a century in a library trying to learn to cast dancing lights. It's very much a labor of love. A third bit of gnome lore is that they're sort of generally whimsical. Like they are, much like halflings, again, a good time to be around. There's a lot of writing on their D&D Beyond presentation about how they are all about fun and joy and good vibes only and laughing and dancing and savoring every last drop of life and painting with all the colors of the wind and whatever blah 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 blah, we get it. Ugh, happy people. In terms of society, as I said, there was a time where they were very associated with the Feywild, but not anymore, which has surprisingly not changed much about them. They live in, very much like halflings, yes, again, very much like halflings, they live in small burrows in hills, although they add the grass typing to this by also living in the forest. Wow, so creative. I told you, they are elves for halflings. That's it, that's what they are. Those that mingle among other races tend to go for jobs like engineering, artificer, magical shopkeeper that your DM tries and unsuccessfully and mildly annoying accent for.
Cause it has wares if you have coin.
If the halfling is here so that DMs can default to them when describing an innkeeper, gnomes are here so that the DM can default to them when describing a tinkerer. Since gnome society is all about not standing out and fame and fortune are like negatively valued, gnomes, much like halflings, tend to not produce many adventurers. Very inspiring stuff when coming up with a PC. Okay, so that's the primer on lore. As I said, they used to be more fake-coded, but they're not fake-coded anymore, which makes it hard to marry a lot of the text on how gnomes had a big presence in the Feywild and got along great with like Eladrin. But that's just retcons for you. What are you gonna do? Oh, apparently we are doing something. Anyway, appearance-wise, gnomes are very shockingly and surprisingly tiny. Tinier than dwarfs, but bigger than halflings. Perfectly mid. Much is made about their hair being like Albert Einstein-y, like sticking out in wild directions. As a matter of fact, you can just show this picture and yep, that's what a gnome is. Wild hair, fun, math related. Yeah, that's pretty much it. At the start of D&D 5e, they gave them like these vertically squished faces with no foreheads, which no thank you. Wow, I wonder why these guys weren't popular. And they've since abandoned this, so we can all cheer. Okay, this seems like a good time for me to get on my soapbox about this, so let me just... Gnomes have pointy ears. Halflings don't have pointy ears. As a resident expert on pointy things, this is my PSA. These two little guys are already basically indistinguishable from one another and not popular, so let's not make it even harder to tell them apart. Also, pointy ears are a good way to explain the whole they are the elves of halflings. Okay, great, we did it, we got that out of the way. Let's move on to abilities. Human Familiar, give us the rundown on what gnomes can do.
Human familiar.
Okay, magical manlets. I've been taking notes on abilities and everything. So gnomes get a bunch of... What are you showing on screen? Oh, you mean the little Gucci dress? The little Gucci dress?
The little Gucci dress.
No, what's all that? Oh, you mean merch? Merch? Merch! That's right. Finally! I've been working on this for ages. Look at it! We're working on merch. I have drawn and designed everything myself. How many YouTubers can say that? The reason why it's taken so long is that I'm doing much more than merch. Much more. And you'll know about it when the time is right. If you thought Kraken Week was big, get ready for this. But why am I talking to you about it now? Well, because all soft goods, that means clothes, the clothing, will be available for purchase at Gencon. That's right, I'm going to Gencon. Or rather, I'm possessing my human familiar and sending him as my eyes and ears. And we're going big this year. I'll be at the Crown booth number 2543, right here, on Friday the 2nd of August from 1 to 2 p.m. and on Saturday the 3rd from 5 to 6 p.m. So we can just hang out and sign whatever y'all want me to sign, merch included, and just say hi. But that's not all. I have 4 panels. One is a panel with just me about making your own stuff for games. I'll talk about how I started, but it's gonna be very audience participation-y. I wanted it to be a space for y'all to ask questions and hang out together. One is an actual event. We're gonna be making a monster together. Like the people that come to the event and me are gonna create some weird little creature together. I have like a whole system set up for it. And if you come, you get the stat block of whatever monster we end up making there. The other panel is a panel with Ginny and Dingo Doodes, which, come on, that's amazing. I can't believe I get to sit with them and talk. It's all about how to start content creation in a unique way that makes you different from everyone else and more likely to succeed. And the final one is a massive, with a capital big panel in an insanely big room with Dungeon Dudes, D&D shorts, and Ginny D. And that one is like one of the biggest panels at Gen Con this year. I don't know if it's the biggest one, but it's one of the biggest ones. Scary, terrifying. Please come support. I'm very scared. Please. That sounds like the scariest thing to me. So if you want to meet and say hi and snack some very early merch, very early, and come hang out with me at these panels I've been planning for months and like whatever, signing, say hi, I've left the links to the panel and my Gen Con schedule below. And by the way, the tickets flew last time. I'm talking within the first 15 minutes, so don't forget to snatch your tickets now. I just wish you would tell me when you do these things. It's a very expensive plane ticket, and I'm not teleporting after what happened. What's that? Here you go. I get merch too? Yeah, I just thought it'd be cute. Okay, don't get all mushy. Gnomes. No, gnomes now. Back to gnomes. Okay. Back to gnomes. Gnome abilities. Let's go. So, gnomes. Oh my god, my own t-shirt. If you play with ability score increases, gnomes get a +2 to intelligence. Intelligence is a stat that only matters to literally one core class. Artificer is not a core class no matter how hard you and I want it to be, which, you know, probably part of the reason gnomes don't see much play. It's funny that in a game made to attract actualies, they made intelligence the least useful stat. Gnome is one of the small races, which, say it with me, means you're worse than a medium race in every possible way. Halflings and goblins get little perks to kinda sorta not really make up for this, but gnomes don't. So I guess you're just stuck with 25 feet of movement and permanent disadvantage to all attacks with heavy weapons. Last time I talked about this, some people told me that the fact that small creatures can mount medium creatures makes up for all the inconveniences, and I hope they got some numbing cream for that incredible reach. They may not get a single thing to make up for the crime of being short little baby boys, but gnomes do get one of the best abilities in the game, Gnome Cunning. This gives gnomes, wait for it, advantage on all intelligence, wisdom, and charisma saving throws against magic. This is up there, but not quite as strong as halfling's luck, but like, what is? It's basically as good as the amount of casting enemies the DM throws at you during the campaign. And that's it. That's it. That's it. Well, okay, on to sub-races. I'll take it from here. Go, wear your t-shirt. Yeah, my own t-shirt. Okay, so there are two types of gnome sub-races. First up, forest gnomes. This is where they stored the Feywild connection gnomes used to have, but toned it down to hell and back until we came to Disney Princess Gnome. Forest gnomes live in, you guessed it, the square hole. If gnomes are generally secretive and like to move by unnoticed, these guys are like the social anxiety version of that. They concentrate on illusion magic to shield themselves and their communities from prying eyes. If you're the type to beeline towards the whole cottagecore little fairy that lives in a mushroom and sits on a stump to eat porridge of stew of pie as she wears earth tones exclusively and puts on too much blush and draws too many fake freckles on, this is it. This is the one for you. Also, how is that Stardew Valley addiction going? This sub-race gives you dex if you do the whole ability scores tied to race thing, which means, I guess Forest Gnome has synergy with Blood Hunter? A perfect fit. They get Natural Illusionist, which is a nice way of saying you get Minor Illusion, and they also get Speak with Small Beasts, which completes the transformation into Certified Disney Princess Blood Hunter. The other subrace for gnomes is the School of Rock Gnome, and it's better in every way to forest gnomes. Rock gnomes have little to no flavor. We're not even told if they live on the square hole.
It goes in the square.
But we do know that they're like tougher and more inventive. This is where the dwarven flavor of gnomes lives, rather than the fey thing they used to have at one point. Real talk, this is just because Dragonlance was popular at one point and it made gnomes into tinkerers, so now gnomes are the tinkering race across the board. It's all very World of Warcraft. As a gnome of the School of Rock, you get a bonus to con, which is better than a bonus to dex because everyone likes when the HP is high, and you get Artificer lore. You're an expert on checks on items, be it some weird magical glowy sword or a fantasy elevator. This is so much better than Disney Princess certification or Minor Illusion that it's not even funny. But if that wasn't all, you also get Tinker. If you spend 1 hour and 10 gold cosplaying Belle's dad from Beauty and the Beast, you can make a little guy. Your little guy can make a little guy of his own. It's worthless in combat, but its worth outside of combat is dependent on how clever and resourceful you are, which is a great way to push you to roleplay a gnome. The little guy in question can do some very limited things, like go in a random direction making noise, make a fire, or play the greatest gnome hits. But you can also argue with your DM to build a little guy that does something else, and then your DM can agree to something without thinking about it, allow your little guy to somehow destroy the campaign, and then go on Reddit to complain about balance. It's what the game is about. And that's all gnomes. We can now move on to Psych! Much like a gnome, I have played the most whimsical prank on all of you, for there is yet another one. Deep gnomes. Also known as... that. Swedish chef gnomes.
Swedish people.
These guys are Underdark gnomes, gnomes that live underground. If gnomes were found underground by their god and led outside, why are these guys different? Who knows? Deep gnomes are the most different of all the gnomes, on account of them being like an entire race of accountants. Whereas other gnomes are known for their joie de vivre and their whimsy. Deep gnomes are known for being boring, as in literally described as joyless by like the text. I don't know, I like it. In terms of abilities, these guys get dark vision, duh. But also they get 30 feet of speed and not 25 despite being small. Look at them go. They also get Gift of the Gift of the Swedish Chef.
That's Sweden, mama.
Despite not being fun to be around, deep gnomes are still Master Illusionists, so they get Disguise Self at level 3 and Non-Detection at level 5. This is so much better than Forest Gnomes getting Minor Illusion that it's just funny. They also get the normal gnome magic advantage on basically every saving throw against magic, which is wild, and they also get Swedish Chef Camouflage, which just gives them advantage on stealth a number of times equal to their proficiency bonus. This is so strong. This is so much stronger than the baseline gnome. Okay, Swedish Chef, work. Okay, so we've looked at gnome lore, gnome abilities, gnome sub-races, the works. So what if we give gnomes a new twist? But before we get into the thick of gnome building, we're gonna want to outfit our gnome with some gear. Yes, picking and choosing magic items at the start is fun, but what about that magical feeling of finding something, not knowing what it does? What about this weird snake thing? It looks neat, but what does it do? How about this funky looking sword? Does it spin? Does it light up in fun colors? Does it decimate your enemy's forces in a whirlwind of steel and pain? Well, this is the entire feeling that Falko's Vault of Wonders is trying to elicit. That's right, we've talked about them before and we're talking about them again because the Kickstarter is up. These are decks of magic items that work in a very special way to maximize whimsy and wonder at the table, which you're watching a video on Gnome, so you know, maximizing whimsy is pretty big. You hand your players the card with the illustration, and once they figure out how the item works, either by identify or some other darker means, you give them the second card with all the info. That first item I showed, that's the Viper's Necklace, and it allows you to see in heat sight like the Jurassic World dinos. The second one, that's a Phantom Fang, baby, and it lets you teleport when you crit. And these are just 2 out of the, get ready, 240, all in themed decks. So if all of this sounds fun, and I'm all about things that generate cool, exciting interactions at the table, so I think it is, go ahead and check out their Kickstarter. It's live right now, and it's the first link in the description. And thank you to Falko's Vault of Wonders for sponsoring this video. And now, back to Gnome Hours. It's quite obvious that there's a problem with gnomes. Literal data shows that they are, as I said, the least played core race. People are not resonating with these guys, and I think I found the reasons why. Yes, stuff like them giving a big plus to intelligence when the stat is barely used does not help, but no, the issues here are deeper. I know I bang this drum 24/7 when it comes to talking about races, but I truly think that aesthetics basically trump every other metric when people decide to play a race. No, you cannot make an aesthetic that pleases everybody, but you can make an aesthetic that is recognizable and iconic to everyone, and let those that find it appealing come to it. We can at least aspire to make every option distinguishable at a glance, and you literally cannot distinguish halflings and gnomes at a glance, like at all. They both have changed so much with each swing of art direction that at this point it's a 50-50 chance if something is either a halfling or a gnome. You cannot tell them apart. But if halflings have the same problem, why are halflings popular and gnomes aren't? Trick question, they aren't. Halflings are just above half-orcs in the core race popularity contest. That is the 3rd least popular core race. But that's still higher than gnomes. Why? Well, IP baby. Halflings are hobbits. They're just hobbits. They were literally called hobbits before the Tolkien estate decided that it was feeling sue-y that day. One of the most popular fantasy IPs has halflings as the heroes of their story. The main character is a halfling in Lord of the Rings. Hell, the main character is also a halfling in the Hobbit movies. It's named after them. Gnomes? Well, there's David the Gnome. And look, I love David the Gnome just as much as any Spanish speaker, but homeboy is not feeding half of the New Zealand tourism industry like Frodo and his male wife are. So is that all? Well, no. This is smaller, but it's still a reason. Remember all the yapping I did about gnome lore changing substantially between editions? This kinda always happens, but it's a pretty big jump here. Now, I barely mention it because I don't want y'all asking me for a dwarf video. I love them as is, but dwarf is my favorite D&D race. It's either them or tieflings depending on the day. I am the furthest thing away from a dwarf hater. I'm a dwarf defender, a dwarf enjoyer. And yet I think that the gnome switch from Fey to Dwarvish has hurt them more than anything else. I get why they did it. Gnomes in folklore are literally underground Fey spirits, so it kind of makes sense to make them Dwarvish, and they really wanted to lean hard on the tinkering thing, but I think this is a mistake. Tinkerer is way too narrow of an aesthetic. It pushes you into such a specific character concept that unless you're going for that extremely specific thing, you're just gonna outright ignore it. Dwarves have blacksmithing as like a part of their culture, but it's not the only part of their culture. Gnomes, now that the whole Fae thing is out of the window, it does very much feel like they are here to be Maurice from Beauty and the Beast, and that's it, not much else. This whole tinkering business, coupled with the fact that gnomes are all about not standing out and going unnoticed, makes them like perfectly designed to be NPCs and not adventurers, which, wow, maybe that translates to people not making gnome PCs. So, what do? I generally don't do this, but why not? I'm gonna propose a visual redesign for the whole race first. We'll get into the actual twist later. Reminder here that I'm not trying to appeal to every single person ever. If you don't like this, that's fine. There's 3,000 other races. What I'm trying to do here is to give gnomes a unique visual identity that makes them easy to tell apart from every other D&D race, while still keeping them feeling gnomey. Let's go. Curious, inventive, whimsical. These are the ingredients to make the perfect little girl, gnome. My proposal? Pointy noses, sloping foreheads, wild hair. Put in that whimsy with mildly exaggerating proportions in the hands and such, but where halflings are all round shapes, bulbous noses and full faces, gnomes are angular, even down to how the hair grows on them. And well, that nose. Okay, that feels no-me to me, and that rhymed, so it must be right. Now, some eagle-eyed viewers might think, this looks very Fey, and guess what? You're right. I try not to retcon when it comes to lore, but rather add to the existing lore to solve some of the issues. Gnome lore is basically non-existent. This is what we know. Gnome god was spelunking, found gnomes in cave, took them out. God of kobolds made gnomes interns for a second. God of gnomes played a practical prank on the god of kobolds that consisted in dropping an entire mountain on top of the kobold guy. The end. Not much lore. So if gnomes used to have a connection with the Fae and also the underground, being born out of gems, if gnomes were led by their god to the surface, and if there's a race of gnomes specifically from the Underdark, one that continues to live below ground, what about the Feydark? That's right, gnomes have a Fey vibe with ties to it in previous editions. Gnomes have connections to the Underdark with deep gnomes. What if we combine those? What if the gnomes that stayed in the Feywild stayed not in the surface, but in the Fey Dark? Something happened to pucks at the beginning of time. Some say that the god of kobolds hunted the pucks nearly to extinction, and the few of them that remained fled to the Feywilds to escape him. Others say that it was the gnome god that abandoned the pucks in the Feywild after the pucks greatly offended him in some way lost to history, so it cannot be repeated, somehow managing to erase the god's perpetual smile off of his face and turning it into a scowl of anger. Whatever the actual reason is, it was erased from all memory, but it forever changed puckish culture. While all gnomes are skittish, pucks take this to a new extreme. They hide away underground in the wilds of the Feydark, away from most creatures that roam the plane. But this is not enough. Pucks hide their face from all by wearing masks that they never take off, even around those closest to them. Despite not even knowing what they are hiding from, hiding has become a part of their culture, and they take great pride in their masks, seeing them as extensions of themselves. They animate them, using their tinkering abilities to make the mask reflect their emotions, making them frown and smile along with the face beneath, only taking this mask off when feeling an incredibly deep connection with someone, or upon a puck's death. Beings from the Feywild often feel emotions in a deeper, stronger way when compared to beings from the prime material. Maybe the puck's fears were amplified by the plane of fairy, but so was their innate gnomish curiosity. Pucks call it their muse. They believe each and every one of them is born with a muse, an object of fascination that they simply must study and learn more from. A puck crafts their mask when they found their muse, making it in the muse's image, and dedicate their lives to pursuing that muse. Pucks with a useful muse ascend ranks quickly in both puckish society, Fey courts in general, and even the material plane for those that cross the path into it. There are stories of pucks who had the art of combat as a muse and became impossibly great heroes, whereas others found their muse in medicine or musical mastery. However, not all pucks are quite as lucky. Some muses are not seen as valuable by as many, or by any, and this is a great source of angst amongst pucks. Puck parents will discourage children from taking on any hobbies that they feel won't lead to a good muse, and yet it happens that a puck finds their muse in something their culture does not value. This is often a reason for pucks to become adventurers, joining those that found a muse that requires them to travel to study their muse in more detail. There are even pucks who can't seem to ever find their muse, and go through life without ever donning a mask, being shunned by their peers for it. These often leave too, in search of their muse elsewhere in the Feywild or beyond it, so that they may finally make a mask for themselves. Whatever the reason is for a puck to leave the nest, it is a fact that many of them do, and whether they do it led by the invisible hand of their muse or by the lack thereof, pucks always leave an indelible mark on anyone that meets their path. Okay, I think that's really neat! That's right, much like with the goblins we leaned on mythology to make them brownies, my take here is to lean on mythology to bring more of the actual gnome mythological figure forward. Gnomes and folklore are underground fake creatures. Let's make them exactly that in D&D, or rather, give them the option to be that. I also wanted them to feel like not just good for NPC fodder, but good for PC fodder. These guys basically sit you down and ask you to come up with a character motivation for them. That's great for a race. What about a puck that has humans as their muse and leaves the Feywild to live among them and understand them better? What about a puck that cannot find their muse no matter what they do and leaves their home to find it as they constantly try new hobbies to see if anything sticks? What about a puck that is a detective and their muse is investigation techniques? Their curiosity is aimed towards finding who committed any crime and why. And what about a puck that lies about what their muse is, relying on everyone assuming that a puck with a useful muse is bound to be useful, so they let that puck into the houses of extremely powerful people. And once inside, their true muse can finally be satiated. Spycraft. It's Gnome James Bond. James Nommed. All of those sound fun, sure, but it's just a shame that pucks live right at the very tip of my hat, where my brain resides. If only you could play them. Oh, what's that? You are curious as to what that link in the description is. Well, I'll satiate your curiosity, for it is the puck, the gnome race made by me that you can use for 100% certified pointy hat free. Bars! And also the merch and the events at Gencon are also there. Please come. I don't want to be lonely. Please don't make me be alone. But what if your muse is another short king but not gnomes? Well, how about halflings? Here's a video on them. To date, one of my favorite twists of all time I've done on this channel. And on the subject of short kings and the Feywild, check out the goblin video. Fey goblins named brownies. Perfect. Okay, bye-bye gnomes, gnomesses, and gnomexes. Mwah!